I am joined by my good friend who's known me for many years. We've known each other for many years, so I'm really happy with this interview. Cathy Garcia is the co-chair of the Santa Fe chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America and the co-chair of the National Lawyers Guild student chapter at UNM, and is here to tell us about something that I think is a huge story that has just gotten barely any press in the corporate media, which is a nationwide prison strike against conditions in the U.S. prisons that's happening right now. Cathy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Zero Hour.
Thank you so much for having me.
So just take us a little bit through it. What's going on? When did it start? And tell us, what are, maybe not who is organizing it yet, but just a little bit of how it came to be. And then what are the demands and how people can get involved. But just take us through what's going on right now.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that I am a second-year law student. So this is a topic that is actually kind of sort of new to me. So I've been learning more and more about this as I've been in class and working with folks like the National Lawyers Guild and just other community organizations that I work with. So I'll just start that the prison strike itself started on Tuesday. That was August 21st. And basically, it's really pushing back on the exploitation of prison labor. But of course, that's not the only thing that it's pushing back on, right? It's pushing back on the conditions in prisons generally, and also, broader topics around mass incarceration, the discriminatory way that sentencing, bail, all of the things that we associate with the criminal justice system, access to legal counsel, just all of these things kind of coming to a head and really being emphasized and focused on during the prison strike. So for folks who may not know, the 13th Amendment allows the use of slavery as a punishment for crimes, right? So the 13th Amendment, of course, was ratified after the Civil War. And for critics of it, they see it as a remnant of the United States' reliance on slavery. If we've abolished this labor force, this free labor force, so then how are we going to exploit that? So what folks did was, then we'll use prison labor. Over the last several years, it's really become more of a flashpoint. It's become more understood and known by folks.
Can we talk, just go through that a little bit? Because I think, Zero Hour listeners and audience, I think, know about it. But let's just make sure the 13th Amendment, quote unquote, abolished slavery, except it had a caveat, right? Except in the case of incarcerated people.
Right.
And that's
for crimes, right.
And so what that, you pair that with a criminal justice system that is structurally racist to the highest degree. And you have people of color incarcerated at way higher levels than white folks in America. On nonviolent drug offenses, for example, just as one of them, even though drug use is basically similar, you have people of color going to prison and serving huge prison sentences. And basically, there's no way around the fact that the criminal justice system is a hugely structurally racist institution. So people of color are more likely to end up incarcerated, and forced labor is allowed when people have been convicted of a crime. So that's kind of did I get most of that right about what you were just laying out there?
Absolutely correct, right? And so one of the reasons that I think this issue has become more and more at the forefront is people have become more aware of private prisons being used to, hold incarcerated folks, right? And so private prisons, of course, are driven by a profit motive to fill those beds, and they're very effective at it, right? You can Google search or just, kind of do some research, and
I
you
use
can see
Bing,
that there are.
Cathy. I do Bing search only.
Or to each their own, right? But because we're using this profit motive to fill these beds, and not just in private, not just in criminal prisons, but also for ICE detainees, for example, who are now also being exploited for their labor. As all of these things have been coming to the forefront, as abolish ICE has become words that maybe folks hadn't been hearing a year ago, everyone is going, well, hey, maybe we should go further than that. Why not just abolish ICE, but why don't we just abolish prisons, right? Which is, of course, the DSA national platform endorses prison abolition, and which is also why DSA has endorsed the nationwide prison strike. And for myself as a law student, I'm really interested in the topic of prison abolition. So if we're going to ever consider it prison abolition as a real goal, not just some hypothetical thing that happens between debate nerds, right? We need to consider every single aspect of how our society and our values intersect with us creating these things, right? Our being beholden to capitalism and using this profit motive, right? This is why, for example, Victoria's Secret, we can afford, have affordable undergarments because they rely on prison labor. The California fires were fought by a lot of inmate detainees. In fact, the California Department of Corrections proudly tweeted out that they had about 60 juveniles fighting fires in the wildfires that were affecting California. Wildland firefighters, trained professional wildland firefighters, die at a rate 6 times higher than structural firefighters, right? What we typically see as the firefighters that work in your community. These are trained individuals, highly trained folks who go through a lot of preparation for this. Do we really think that our prisoners are getting that same level of training and attention, right? So I think it's also about how we view prisoners as maybe less than, as deserving of what they get when they're in prison, right? It's not supposed to be Club Med, everyone says. But I think it's also part of the question is, what do we really envision prison or punishment really about? Are we trying to rehabilitate folks, or are we trying to just throw the book at them and say, because you've been incarcerated for whatever, does that mean that your life is now worth less? Right? I mean, are we going to say that about murderers? Are we going to say that about burglars? Are we going to say that about folks who were, dealing marijuana on the side? Right? I mean, where are these lines? And I think if we're going to really believe in prison abolition, we need to have all of these conversations, which aren't easy, right? I mean, and they're very emotional for folks. How do we bring together victims' rights advocacy groups, but also prisoners' rights advocacy groups? How do we create restorative justice as the center of our values around crime and punishment?
So where do the prison strikes fit in terms of raising these issues up and the profile of these issues up? To me, the entire concept of a private prison is anathema. It should be eliminated. Just like there's no question in my mind that if you put the profit motive on incarceration, it means you will find ways to incarcerate people to create a workforce that are exploited. And so like the profit motive and incarceration just should never be, and then you get the hedge funds involved. I mean, like, this is just, there's no doubt in my mind that we should get rid of all, that private prisons as a concept should be eliminated. Private detention centers should be eliminated. Where does the prison strikes right now happening, in raising those are policy questions. You've also brought up some like philosophical questions, but there's also just day-to-day questions of treatment of inmates in prisons around the country. And can you kind of get into how this is working in raising these interrelated but somewhat separate aspects of what's happening right now with the criminal justice system? Absolutely.
So we know that conditions in prisons can be very barbaric, right? Folks are being thrown into solitary confinement for minor infractions. Solitary confinement being very, I would say,
it's been termed torture. It's been termed torture by World Health experts that solitary confinement is torture. Long periods of solitary confinement, and in the United States, I believe it's state by state have different laws on it, but there are places where there are, people are held in solitary confinement for years. Sorry, Cathy, I cut you off.
No, that's fine. But that's exactly correct, right? The other things are things like poor access to healthcare in the prisons. A minor, I mean, we're also seeing this just with healthcare generally across the country, right? But if you don't have access to preventative care, then the next thing you know, you're having to do much more extreme invasive procedures to solve a problem that easily could have been solved, months previously. You also have things like the profit motive is driving access to communication, right? Prisoners have to pay exorbitant rates to be able to access telephones, to be able to contact their loved ones, to stay in contact with their friends and family, right? So if we're cutting off these folks from society and isolating them further, right, we're adding to the trauma of prison. So when folks get out of there, are they any better prepared to reintegrate into society, right? Which is, these kinds of phrases that folks use. But are we really working that? Like, are we really making that happen? Overworked public defenders have massive caseloads. Access to legal representation is really, really expensive. So here again, we're seeing these intersections of capitalism and poverty, and just how we're actually making these systems work. Of course, on the day-to-day side, we are seeing that folks are making great strides in the field of criminal justice reform, right? Larry Krasner, the Philly DA, is grabbing headlines all the time because he's ending cash bail. He's holding corrupt cops accountable. He's restructuring the DA's office and their priorities on what they will and will not prosecute. He's declining to seek the death penalty in certain cases, which puts him at tremendous odds with the police officers' unions.
And winning on saying that, right? Like, that's the part you said. The new thing is that there is this understanding now, and there's organizing. Sean King and others organizing aimed at putting good prosecutors, right? Like, aimed at saying the thing for years was, like, if you weren't tough on crime, which meant they were always competing to see who could be tougher and tougher, and that just goes up, forever. But now we're seeing that there's organizing aimed at going the other direction. It actually questions, answering some of those questions, or at least asking some of those questions that you asked before. Like, what is the purpose of criminal justice? What are we aiming to do here? Cathy, I want to return to the prison strike in the last couple minutes here. If I can ask Troy to put the demands up on the screen. It's going to take a second here. But we have the demands up on the screen here. And can you tell people, like, where they can, because I think part of this is that the media has not, and the corporate media has no incentive to cover this, seeing as though the corporate media, the corporations that own it all, are all part of one big happy oligarchy with the private prisons and the media, et cetera. Where can people find out about this and get involved through DSA, or where would you push people to find out more?
Well, obviously, as a DSA member, I'm going to push folks to reach out to their chapters and see what locally, how locally they can get involved. But the international workers of the world, the IWW, as far as I know, have been the folks who have been kind of spearheading this. They have a prisoner-led section of the IWW called the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee, and you can find them at incarceratedworkers.org. And there is there they have a list of resources like information. I mean, this is one of the places that I've been going to educate myself about this as I've been getting more involved with these topics. There was another website where I found a complete list, or a more complete list, of organizations that are in solidarity with the prison strike. That is sawarimi.org, SAWARIMI. And there they had a list of international and national organizations that are all working on this topic. So I would encourage folks to go to those websites and find an organization that they may already be affiliated with that is supporting the prison strike, or to find one like locally. So I think what matters is that we build a coalition of groups that are working on this, right? There are so many groups that are doing this. The National Lawyers Guild, I know, issued a statement in solidarity with the prison strike. So I think it's just about finding the group that is more aligned with your own beliefs and values. And there is clearly a huge list of groups that are becoming more and more involved in this.
Cathy Garcia, thank you so much for joining us on the Zero Hour to talk about the nationwide prison strike that's going on right now. I think it's part of a larger movement on criminal justice reform that is extremely exciting and has the ability to really reshape something that is fundamentally broken right now in our society. So, Cathy, I look forward to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but a prosecutor like you is something that I could look forward to in the future. Somebody who is actually asking the questions that you are asking about what is the purpose of our criminal justice system. So thank you for joining us on the Zero Hour and raising up this important issue of the national prison strike.
And again, thanks to you folks for highlighting it and for having me here.